Yes, there are a few constellations that actually align with the signs when speaking from an astrological perspective. However, not all of them do. And most of astrology, as you know from me talking about this and being a big star expert and talking about all of the actual constellations that are behind the stars on a regular basis, they don't apply to the majority of astrology. And the majority of actual signs are ignored from a constellational standpoint. However, when it comes to Aquarius, Aquarius is one of the two or three actual constellations that truly align with how their sign is played on and based in. So, with that being said, let's get into the actual story of Aquarius, right? Now, Aquarius was back in the BC times, living in the kingdom of Troy, which was, kind of around like, BC times, don't quote me on it. Maybe it's around Babylonian or, the Old Testament times or whatever it is. But basically, the constellation of Aquarius was founded in and actually born in to a different time and space a little bit after this time period, right? So basically, where Aquarius starts, it was named after the, you know, prince of Troy at the time, which was known as Ganymede, right? Now, Ganymede sounds like a lot of different things. It sounds like something you would find in a processor. It sounds like something you would find on the periodic table, as well as it sounds like someone that, you know, would be found in the space of ancient times, maybe even Hebrew for that matter. So, with that being said, Ganymede was found to be quite beautiful, quite handsome, quite powerful back in the Greco Roman areas. And when it comes to that actual space, he was recognized to be quite beautiful, so much to the point that he was actually swept up by Zeus or Jupiter, depending on who you ask, and brought up to Mount Olympus to be serving as a water bearer, or not necessarily a water bearer, because that's not what those Greco-Roman gods necessarily wanted to be. I guess you could say drinking on at that time. However, they were implied to basically, they were asked to grow up to actually bring this energies to really grow, to really expand upon it, and allow them to grow beyond, just having the regular old drink service person, right? So, with that being said, this actual person expanded way beyond that. They loved his service. They loved that experience, right? So, after they flew him up on the eagle to actually go up to Mount Olympus to basically be expanded upon and, you know, grow his skills instead of just being a regular old Prince of Troy, he was out there pouring up the ambrosia. He was out there pouring up the elixir of life, getting those gods, crunk off whatever they wanted to drink. So when they got up there and actually they spent time up there for a while, people forgot about his princely services. People forgot about his princely duties. This man was the Prince of Troy. So his parents or the king and queen of Troy got a little riled up. So what they had to do was they had to communicate with the gods. They had to experience with the gods. And the gods are like, dang, like, I feel you. You don't want to miss your son. You don't want to not have a prince. You don't want to have an heir to the throne, even though the story of your son becoming the heir to the throne is it'll probably satisfy the kingdom. So they met in the middle, right? And what did they do? How did they actually come to this agreement of breaking down, like, hey, this is what this guy's got going on. This is what this guy's experiencing. And what they did was they actually created the constellation of Aquarius to be the shining light in the sky that gives them a reminder to actually experience what it means to have their sun, to see their energies, to remember that he is in a higher place, a much more powerful place, and a much more experienced place to, live out his princely duties, right? Like, even though he is just serving that drink, getting those gods drunk, getting them, the elixir of life and what they need, he is still around showing them that, he's there. He's doing his thing and he's experiencing, right? So when it comes to the actual influence of Aquarius and, Ganymede actually experiencing and, growing his energies to the standpoint of representing the kingdom in a higher space and following through on a mission, he is doing a lot of different things that would be correlated to the energy and the influence of Aquarius. Now, Aquarius, in terms of its energetic influence, is correlated to Jupiter, naturally Saturn. Jupiter is kind of a low one because Jupiter appreciates it and actually brings it up to the celestial kingdom. But it is much closer to Saturn, Mercury, and Jupiter, right? Because he has a good understanding of responsibility, a good understanding of structure, a great influence, and a great power that is in reference to what's the word? A great power that is in reference to their abilities to basically kind of like manage the public, manage the crowd, and manage an experience, right? So, with that being said, the influence of Jupiter is very closely tied to understanding the public, understanding the social dynamics, understanding the structure of what's going on in society, and experiencing true power in regards to what it means to appease the public and leverage that public awareness in a way that allows, everybody to kind of be happy, along with that Aquarian energy to specifically have its influence, its desires, and its plans to, meddle around in the public in such a way where it can accomplish what it needs to. You know what I'm saying? So, with that being said, it is a powerful energy. It's a very useful energy. It's a very useful influence. But when it comes to the difference between the actual sign and constellation, there is a small, there's a few small tweaks, right? So, as we know from the story, this was an individual that was taken into a situation that it didn't necessarily anticipate. However, it maneuvered through with prowess. It maneuvered through with beauty, right? So when it comes to that, the Aquarian energy in terms of the constellation is a bit more go with the flow. And the reason why it is a bit more go with the flow is because it spans, the constellation itself actually spans like the 30 degrees, like someone actually anticipates. More specifically, it's like 28 degrees, but it spans from nowadays during 2024 times 12 degrees of Aquarius all the way through about 20 and a half degrees of Pisces, right? So it's like, actually, no, that's actually closer to 40 degrees, my mistake. So it is, it's powerful energy. It's a very expansive energy, but it is not necessarily the most, I guess you could say, rigid energy like a standard Aquarius would. So when it comes to the constellation, it is split between that Aquarian and Pisces energies, specifically now during that time, because that's the energy it, resonates with, it experiences with, it does all that stuff. So when it comes to the Aquarius power and the Aquarian ability, it's shifting into more of a free flowing space. It's shifting into more of a, hey, well, I'm here and I'm hanging out with the gods. I didn't want this growing up, but it's not bad. I'm hanging out with the gods. This is about as high as it gets until, I hear them getting drunk since I'm serving them all their ambrosia and their elixir of life to expand beyond that, right? So, with that being said, the Aquarian energy is a bit more go with the flowy in terms of its constellational abilities, but it's also what? It also still has its understanding of public perception and managing, social circles, but it also has the ability of luck. Aquarian energies nowadays are much more lucky. And what's interesting about that is they still retain a lot of that Saturnian influence. So this is where we get into one of the key words of Aquarius, which is positioning. They know how to position themselves. And if they get into certain positions, they know what to do with it, which is a very, very interesting aspect of that Aquarian influence. Because when they grow beyond that and they expand into that constellational awareness, they have a few tools up their sleeve to grow, expand, and actually push themselves beyond what most may think they are capable of achieving. And how do they achieve this? They do it through networking and positioning, knowing the right people, knowing the right experiences, knowing the right ability to expand into, which is that subtle, flavor of Jupiter actually being applied to that Aquarian constellation, right? And we'll get more into it once we actually talk about these specific big stars, but a little bit more on the actual constellation before we get there, right? So, one of the things you need to remember about the constellations is that the kind of like star energy is always flowing, it's always moving, it's always expanding, right? Now, they were originated in the actual space that they were advertised to be. So it's like the Aquarius constellation grew up in the space of Aquarius, which is how it got its name of the 11th house, right? And it just moves on and it expands and it changes its experience. So, with that being said, Aquarius is quite the maneuverable energy that people don't necessarily understand, right? They understand trends, they understand positioning, they understand networking. So if we take it back to the story of Ganymede actually moving up into Mount Olympus, you can understand that, yeah, he had his hands a little bit in when it comes to royalty, which, if we know anything about history, royalty came from the concept of being divinely guided or divinely chosen or having divine bloodline and being correlated to a ruling class. So, depending on what kind of conspiracy theories you get into about that, whether gods were aliens or whatever. The point is having that air of royalty gives them a step up. It gives them an ability to, you know, kind of know their way around when it comes to having that opportunity of being like, oh, I guess I'm being taken by an eagle, which may have been Aquila, which is the next constellation I want to talk about, moving up into Mount Olympus to actually be the gods. So when it comes to that understanding and it comes to that, knowledge of kind of having their toe dipped into royalty, that shows their ability of positioning and networking. So when the constellation of Aquarius gets into that space, this is an understanding of what's going on in the culture, what's going on with society, at which level am I experiencing, and most importantly, what do these people like? So when we ask that question of what do these people like, Aquariuses naturally have a inclination of, hey, these people like, they like wealth, they like abundance, they like to be cool, but they're still people and they like to hang out, right? They still have their desires, they still have their social needs to be met. So all I have to do is tweak those things of what they like, what they expect in a basic human level of social dynamics, and kind of put that together, right? But that's not the whole story. That's just what gets them in the door. That's just what allows them to stay. What leverages their ability to actually gain anything out of it or gain a network or gain a connection is a deeper sense of purpose and trust. So, how do you cultivate that as an Aquarius? Well, you have to ask the questions of, well, what angle do you want to go from? What does this person fear? What does this person love? What does this person need at the end of the day, right? So doing like those first couple steps of understanding the culture, understanding the level that you're at, gets you in the position to open them up, right? To talk to them, to be a person. And once you kind of get in that understanding, which is, what Ganymede was doing by being the ambrosia bearer, that positioned him in a way to be around when they have, loose lips. They're a bit more open, they're a bit more loose, no pun intended, and to hear things, to understand things, right? So he kind of knew the part that he was playing at the end of the day, but he didn't necessarily overstep or, outshine the master per se. And he played his role and he played his position. And this is what the Aquarian energy kind of does, right? It knows what's going on. It knows how to keep its stability within itself and knows how to be knowledgeable of the social situations and what's going on. But if it moves on, it gets a little bit different when it starts to flex its muscles and know how to ask for certain things or expand for certain things and really open people up into a space of, oh man, we got some more live viewers. Everybody like the live, kind of get more people understanding these constellations. So with that being said, the Aquarian energy puts people in such in awareness of social dynamics and what's going on and knowing how to play the natural roles of everything that is occurring at this moment in time. So when it comes into that and we get into a little bit more of the fixed stars, we can kind of understand how different degrees of this Aquarian ocean and leading into the Piscean ocean allow people to have a deeper knowledge of what's going on. So without further ado, let's move into the stars. So in this case, we have about 16 total fixed stars that are seen as the, I guess you could say, uh, they're like 16 total fixed stars that are applied in a very static position and very, neutral position. But the ones we're going to talk about is kind of the main, since there's a lot of stars that are actually like here, you can see. Like I only listed on this actual page maybe just a couple stars here and there, but it wasn't necessarily all of them, right? So here we have like there's like Sadalbachia, which is kind of like where is that? Yeah. So Sadalbachia is like one of like three main stars that are actually on the jug of the Aquarius constellation, but in reality there is a bit more. So it's like Sadalmelik and then what is it? Sadalsuud, which is they sound like a lot of like dwarven, I guess you could say, like the like the Dwemer things in Skyrim, like the little Dwemer huts and lodges or whatever. But basically, these stars are they're all kind of similar and they're all kind of next to each other. So I basically chose six to actually talk about in regards to what's going on right here and right now. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, and talking about the actual fixed stars, just a little reminder: the oh damn, I forgot to do that. I need my pen. Where's my pen? There it is. Okay, I didn't forget a pen for too long. Cool. So, man, I gotta write down the timestamps. So, actually, talking about that, we'll say it was around like 15 minutes. Yeah. So, basically, breaking down the list of stars, we're going to talk about six main ones because there's a lot of them together, like I mentioned, that aren't specifically like they don't do that much different things. Like, it's a little tweak, but it's not that big of a one, right? So, the six stars that we're going to be talking about, which range from 12 degrees of Aquarius all the way into about 9 degrees of Pisces. Once again, the actual Aquarius constellation lasts from 12 degrees of Aquarius all the way through 20 degrees of Pisces, which is about 38 degrees in total occupied space across the stars. But when it comes to the stars that are much closer to, I guess you could say, like 20 degrees of Aquarius, Pisces, those are all the stars that are actually basically at the bottom of the splash, right? And there are about seven stars that are at the bottom of the splash for the water bearers pouring, right? So moving into the first star, we have Abali, which is the left hand of the Aquarius constellation. Now, Abali is a funny star because it has a combination of a mercurial as well as Saturnian influence, right? It's the left hand, so it's uncertain and it kind of leans on that side of the Uranian influence of the star. So when it comes to Abali, the left hand of the Aquarius constellation, this is at 12 degrees of Aquarius. You know, 1 + 2 = 3, so it's even extra, I guess you could say, it's even more it's even more like I guess you could say a third Housean, which is kind of like how I extract the information about the fixed stars if there's nothing online, which is I basically look at what's going on with the star. I look at the chakra that it's correlated based off how it influences us. And I kind of interpret based off of that, right? So with it being on the left side, correlating more towards Uranus, it kind of deals with that, like, I guess you could say social dynamic understanding from a space of people's mentalities, right? So anybody who angles that kind of like early to mid second decan of the Aquarian energy is quite focused on understanding people's mentalities, understanding what they want from a base of childhood, right? So these are people that are very good when it comes to psychology. They're very good when it comes to a social understanding of where people are based at in life, right? Because when you're talking to people, you can kind of break down their mentality from a space of the like different levels of life. So there's their childhood mentality, there is their adolescent mentality, and then there is their adult mentality, right? So when it comes to these Abali people or these kind of like early to mid degrees Aquarian people, they are very attuned to people's spaces and where they're at in their mental state, which is a quite useful tool. It's a very useful skill, but it's like unforeseen, right? So they just kind of get intuitive hits, intuitive understanding, intuitive awarenesses to what people have going on when you speak about it from a standpoint of where are they at in life? Where are they stuck, right? So if you, for example, like know people that have done a lot of drugs or they partied a lot in high school, they are most likely frozen in terms of brain development at that level of life, which gives you an inference in terms of their emotional control, their ability to be mature, their ability to understand responsibilities in certain situations, right? So when it comes to using that and understanding that, people that have that Abali based influence are very good, right? So they aren't exactly the best of understanding, I guess, like people on a grand scale, But when it comes to an individual scale and understanding like what year people are born, what are the common cultural inferences of people born during that time, they're very good on an individual or group based understanding of social dynamics and leveraging how to do that, right? But it doesn't come from a very rigid, like Saturnian place. It comes from a very intuitive place, a very knowledgeable place. So when we think about things, sorry, I'm looking at what Trey's saying. That was just an example. That was just an example of like understanding social dynamics from the standpoint of like talking about the influence of this specific star and where they actually gain like information and knowledge of people, right? And the reason why I talked about it from that standpoint was correlated to the like three main mentalities that people can be frozen at in terms of their experience, right? So when it comes to say like someone being stuck in their childhood state, or like when people are in deep fear, they kind of clam up and go to like their inner child. And then there's adolescence, which is the main point of life, and then there is adulthood, right? So me using that example was basically like kind of running through the thought space of what someone who has this influence would likely think about when they meet people, or they are talking to people, or they are networking with people, right? That kind of just like intuitively runs through their head in terms of basically breaking down who they're dealing with, how they should deal with them, and what that person is genuinely interested in. So when it comes to Abali, to kind of like summarize, they are quite good at interpreting people, their mental states, where they're at in terms of age, and they specifically focus on that inner child in terms of breaking down what they may need, what they would want to experience, and how they could grow as a person, as well as kind of like giving that person what they need so they can get what they need, and also deciphering whether they should even continue the relationship to begin with, because when you're kind of focused on people who are sort of stuck in that inner child state, there are, the probability of them being successful in a material standpoint drops extremely, which basically implies they're stuck in their past childhood trauma and they're probably poor and useless and have no skills. So, with that being said, let us move on to Sadalsuud. And Sadalsuud is basically a similar star. However, they rely on a much more, I guess you could say, Saturnian standpoint. Now, when it comes to Sadalsuud is at 23 degrees and 44 minutes of Aquarius at this, year of 2024. And they are the left shoulder, which is much more correlated to Saturn and Mercury, right? Emphasis on the Saturnian side. So Sadalsuud is a much more rigid, rule-based person, and I guess you could say they still have that Aquarian, like chaotic, like know how to be air in a jar type of energy, but they focus on a lot more rules, a lot more boundaries, a lot more restrictions, right? So instead of operating on kind of like more ideological, like intuitive things, they operate much more on boundaries, like the subconscious rules that people stick through. And the, I guess you could say, more like um like generational understandings of culture in terms of like how to maneuver with people. So they don't necessarily how do I, oh, there you go. They don't necessarily like go after things from as much of an intuitive space. They're more like kind of close to center. So it's like, for example, oh, what? Okay. So for this would be left to you guys still. Oh yeah, it's left to me. So if you move on this side of the spectrum in terms of intuition, like Abali's like all the way over here, whereas like Sadalsuud is all the way like over here, right? Like it's literally at the shoulder. It's not at the hand, it's at the shoulder. So while it is intuitive, it's kind of like a Google search in terms of information that's already indexed. It's not like intuitive, just like your spirit guide just tossed you a download or a data set of some type of information, right? So Sadalsuud is a very powerful star in the standpoint that it is rigid, it is certain, right? It has a lot more certainty than Abali. Abali is just kind of going off the vibe. Like even though it is like very Aquarian, it's much more Piscean in terms of how it handles things because it's the hand, right? When we think about the third house, when we think about the understanding of these spaces, it it touches, it feels, it does like basic inference. Whereas the shoulder is the connection to your entire like body, your rib cage. It's more bone based than it is like everything, you know? So Sadalsuud is very rigid in terms of its position of where it's drawing its knowledge base from. It does majoritarily the same thing as Abali. However, the route it gets there is much more rigid. It's much more, like, you could say, standardized or even stagnant at some points, but it is equally as powerful because it doesn't move as fast. It's very focused, right? So when we think about Sadalsuud, it is very soothing to people. That is the energy that it kind of attacks. I guess you could say, like, meeting people and networking and kind of dancing around social dynamics. So when we think about these things, Sadalsuud is a focused star. It's a powerful star. It likes to actually study psychology. It likes to actually study social groups. It likes to actually study, I mean, I guess you could even say like anthropology, or like more of like an ancient study of cultures to sort of see how things grew. Not only looking at growth in terms of an individual person based off of cultural upbringing, but also looking at things of historical natures and maybe even leading into like understandings of genetic memory, right? Where it's just like, okay, you're Italian, you're also an Aries. Like, talk to very like, you like to talk like this. You know what I'm saying? So it looks at things like that. It looks at cultural standpoints much deeper than just what's going on based around their generational planets, right? So when we kind of take all of these things into account, Sadalsuud is a much more studious version of Abali, and it really likes to, I guess to summarize, it really likes to create its findings and work off its mental frameworks from a very studious and logical, space that allows them to actually have some type of data to bounce through instead of just working on their intuition. So, with that being said, let us move on to Ancha. And Ancha is the, I guess you could say, the right side of the solar plexus in regards to what's going on with Aquarius, right? So when we talk about Ancha and the solar plexus, like, it's kind of funny because I like to think about the etymology of Ancha, which is similar to the Ankh, or like what I guess you could say what conspiracy theorists would basically call like the lightning staff of the Anunnaki or whatever. But the thing about it is it's very correlated to energy and controlling of frequencies, right? Which is basically what the solar plexus does. So when we think about the right side of things, we think about logical, we think about righteous, we think about regulation, and fixed star Regulus. So when it comes to Ancha being the right side of the solar plexus of Aquarius, think about all your Aquarius friends. Think about what gives them energy. Think about what gives them excitement, right? Like, they just like to have fun. They just like to do whatever they're focusing on at that time. And all of the social dynamic stuff is kind of like a subconscious, like, flick of the wrist that positions them to be in a space of, like, power, so they can kind of like do what they want. It's not like they have a lot of emotional drive behind doing what they do. They just kind of do it because either they have to do it or they think it's cool, and there's not much in between. So when we think about Ancha and the origins of their power and what gives them excitement, I want to bring us back to the story of kind of how Aquarius came to be, which is the Prince of Troy, Ganymede, was flown up to Mount Olympus, and then his parents, or the king and queen of Troy at that time, were like, "Damn, where's our son? Like, we like that he's hanging with the gods. That's cool, but we're still parents. So we want like something." And then they gave them the constellation of Aquarius to show that, like, hey, he's living up in the stars doing their thing. You can look at him every night. Are we square? Okay, cool. And the whole time it's like no one's really talking about the feelings of Ganymede. But one could assume, since there were no complaints and he was like, I kind of miss my parents, he was hyped to be there. He was hyped to do his thing. So when we think about like the energetic source and the righteous energetic source, of course, when it comes to Aquarius, like, Aquarius is kind of just recognized that they're just tossed into a soup of experience, and they don't really have a care for like what's going on outside of what they want to do in that moment, right? Which is a very, from a spiritual perspective, it's a very wise choice to have, Like, you're incarnating the bodies for infinite lifetimes. You're doing your infinite thing. Like, you're just hanging out, experiencing like whatever, So the when it comes to understanding that and really like dabbling and diving deep into that question, like Aquarius is experience a very high spiritual perspective on what it means to just be, you know? Like they're here and they kind of understand that to truly create your heaven, whether it's from an unconscious or subconscious standpoint, you need to consciously be working on what you want to do in that moment, right? So when it comes to Ancha and people actually experiencing Ancha, which is, at 3 degrees and 36 minutes of Pisces currently at 2024, it'll move probably closer to, 3 degrees and 40 minutes by the time we hit 2030. But besides that, Ancha is like a very intuitive, go with the flow star that is quite powerful. It's quite expansive and it really puts people into the proper perspective of how they should live their lives, where it is, you should be just doing what you want to do as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. Like heaven is what you make of it, which is kind of like what Anka pushes. It pushes that energy of like, if you truly want to be in a space of peace and you want to be energized and you want to be happy about what you have going on or find joy, which is much more easy to sustain, then you should specifically focus on what do you have going on right now. What do you want to do? Like what do you want to experience? What do you want to bring to the world? And do that and think exclusively of that, which is one of the other things that Anka can give you, which is clarity of mind, clarity of understanding. It kind of brings up the quote of you can be, at peace with yourself and at war with the world, or at war with yourself and at peace with the world. So it's like, which world do you want peace in? Do you want it internally or do you want to manifest it externally? Of course, there's a happy medium, but at what cost? And those are kind of the things that like Anka pushes you, which is like the very high natured and the very positive nature of what it means to be selfish or self-sufficient. So with that being said, let's talk about Sadalmelik. And Sadal 32. Perfect. So Sadalmelik is the right shoulder of the Aquarius constellation. It is actually currently at 3 degrees and 40 minutes of Pisces. And when it comes to the shoulders both have a very like similar influence, right? So to give you a reference, the other shoulder was Sadalsuud, and which is the left shoulder. Now the right shoulder is Sadalmelik. And Sadalmelik is quite similar to Sadalsuud, with the only difference of it leans more towards Saturn rather than a Uranian influence, which is the typical, influence of Aquarius. And when we talk about that from that standpoint, the main difference of the right side is they study and they use their gifts for a righteous standpoint, right? So it's very like cerebral, it's very mental, it's very, I guess you could say, like standardized in that way of they grow up to do a certain thing, they intend to do a certain thing, and they execute on that certain thing regardless of how they feel, right? So that's where that cold-hearted Aquarian nature kind of comes into play. So when we talk about Sadalmelik, or it makes me think of sandal melon when I when I hear that word. So Sadalmelik is it's a very righteous star. Like this is the type of star that like goes out to, or it influences you to go out to be a therapist or someone that heals or like an EMT or a righteous judge. It really pushes you to do all types of things. So when we think about like Sadalmelik is a very righteous version of someone that studies psychology. They study anthropology. They really study, the growth and evolution of cultures. And when we think about these things and we kind of look at that from a righteous standpoint, like it's almost like the historical like breakdown of a Pleiadian starseed, where it's like they want to do everything righteous, so they incarnate to be a cop, a good cop, or whatever, and they really expand on the ability to kind of just like help society from a very like standardized, like of the system type of way. So regardless of if you think that's good or bad or like however you feel about it, they intend to make a difference in the world, and they intend to do it in a very positive way that helps people grow, expand, and actually become, who they need to be from the eyes of the system, right? So it's very like, it's not like they don't have an understanding of anything else or like doing alternative means and just kind of doing whatever. It just sort of looks like they need to like, they just need help like seeing other ways. and they don't necessarily oppose it. It's like they don't oppose it and they don't like judge it too harshly. They just look at it like it doesn't necessarily work. You know, they're just like, why are you trying that? We have a system that works. This is what we've historically grown into. Yeah, of course, there's innovation. I understand that, but innovate in this direction. You know what I'm saying? So it's a very like rigid star, even though it isn't kind of in that Pisces space, but it's still a valuable star. It just kind of like struggles to really understand differences in evolution and innovation, which is a smart thing to avoid if you actually want to succeed in business, although that is the antithesis of what's promoted to society. But you know, when it comes to innovation, like it just iterate on what's new. Don't necessarily innovate a new path because it's a hard path and you better have money behind you to actually do it, right? And the best way I can explain that is like in terms of organic growth, like TikTok wasn't really doing it. But what they did have was $1 billion advertising budget. So even though they didn't have enough users, they could still advertise in places like Times Square or Tiananmen Square or like places in Chongqing, you know, and like stuff like that. So it's a it's a very like by the book star, and they don't necessarily like can see other ways, although they are open to it. So with that being said, let's move on to Sadalachbia. I always say it as Sadalachbia, but it's Sadalachbia. I'm gonna put them in the chapters when I actually write the video. But Sadalachbia is is a one of the stars of the jug that the water bearer holds, and it is specifically on the, I guess you could say, the left side of the jug, although it doesn't really matter. But it is how I always see the jug is I see that as the mental framework that Aquarian energies use to basically mold the flows of what they want to direct people towards. So when we look at it like that, this is like a step beyond basically all the stars we just listed, which was Abali, Sadalsuud, Ancha, and Sadalmelik, and now Sadalachbia, which is a star that directs people. You know, it's like the manifestation of the mental framework that Aquarians would put onto people to direct them in a certain direction, right? So it's a bit of a complicated thing, and to give you a more simplified example, it's basically like not to really associate this with Aquarius, but to give it with an example that has a certain emotional charge to it. Sadalachbia is a it's like it's basically like the crafted lie that is designed to redirect and position some people that a manipulator or a psychopath would push people in, right? It's not necessarily a like it's not necessarily always in that experience, although that is the most notable and I guess you could say like obvious explanation of how to actually apply this. So it's just an interesting thing when we look at it from that standpoint because it's like it is a powerful star, but it like you know it's like why are you manipulating people in that situation? Why are you crafting a lie that puts people in that situation? You know what I'm saying? So that's where it kind of comes into an oddity of Sidalakbia, which is at just like kind of smack even 7 degrees of Pisces, right? Which is ironic because everybody thinks that seven's the lucky number when in reality it's not. Nine is more of a lucky number. Eight is more of a monetary gain number. When seven is more or less like it's kind of like all the shit that Kanye talked on the College Dropout album, where it's like, yeah, I have my degrees and I use them as a blanket because I'm homeless, you know. So it's like it's basically kind of what it is. In terms of its like planet adjacent influence, it is Jupiterian, which the logic behind that could be typically associated with the knowledge of like you're creating a space for a lot of mental energy to flow into, which is very expansive and very explosive in terms of you and your ability to grow as an individual with your own focus and manifestations. So when we talk about like Sadalakbia and that like specific, like I guess you could say, light, it is, you know, it's powerful, it's useful, it has a strong ability to help and influence, but in terms of its actual influence, it is specifically focused on the, I guess you could say, like storyline or narrative that Aquarians typically use to drive and, focus the, what's the word? Focus the masses in whatever direction they want. So Sadalachbia and it being the, I guess you could say, like left side of the jug is the space that is created to direct the masses, right? So now that we get a little bit more into it, I'll probably talk about a bonus star because I feel like I got to talk about it. What you call it? But moving on before we talk about the bonus star. So we have the next star, which is at 9 degrees and 12 minutes of Pisces, which is Skat. And for those of you that know, those of you that have been following me for a while, one of the people in a little online group, Millionaire, he actually hit me up like 2 or 3 years ago to do like an outro or an intro for his album. I'll plug it in the chat, which was Skat, which is I think it was either the star that angled his ascendant or moon, one of the two. But basically, he made an entire album about it called Scattermind, spelled based off of the star. And the way I explained it in that is it's the most Aquarian star possible, specifically because it angles the calf and or the 11th house of the Aquarius constellation. Now, when we talk about Skat, Skat has an interesting influence being the right calf because it's very mercurial. And it's kind of just like, I don't know, it's like a very like social, very like popular star. It's quite similar to Aquarius moons, at least how I see it. But it's similar to Aquarius moon from the standpoint of it's very talkative, right? It likes to speak to people. It likes to be a man of the people. It likes to show. It likes to just like kind of like free flow. It likes to do its thing, which is why I sort of think it influenced like that old jazz style of scat singing, right? Where it's like blah, 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 you're just kind of going around being free, flowing, and letting people know how you feel and how you experience certain situations, whether whether they like it or not, right? So it kind of has that like Piscean influence of it's very aware. It likes to live in the flow. It likes to be moving around. It likes to be in those social dynamics and social situations of mild expansion. So with that being said, Skat is a very powerful star in terms of like kind of like being like a kid at recess, just moving around saying hi to everybody. But it isn't necessarily like it's not the be all end all. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't really go out of its way to do anything specific. It doesn't go out of its way to necessarily like direct itself the way like more Saturnian aspects of the Aquarius constellation would. But it it likes to flow. It likes to experience. It likes to dabble. It likes to dodge, dip, duck, and dive, and just do its thing in terms of conversation, mentalities, and social dynamics. It's more or less kind of like a I wouldn't necessarily say this is like conscious or even subconscious, but it's kind of like an unconscious vacuum of mentalities and experiences from the Aquarian standpoint. That's pretty much Skat. But now that we are moving on, let's actually talk about the bonus star, which is Sechula and Hydor. So Sechula and Hydor are pretty much the, I guess you could say, the flows of the jug, which are like, I don't know, it's like they're like the least Aquarian out of all the Aquarian stars, you could say. So it's like it's I don't know, it's like hard to say because they are sort of Aquarian. However, they aren't necessarily like Aquarian. Like I think they lean more towards Pisces. You know what I'm saying? So when it comes to that like Piscean energy, it's like they are the flow. They are the experiences of the flow. So that's where those like latter end of the Aquarian constellation that like isn't necessarily a part of the body of the jug. It's more a part of the flows, which is like if you count it up, it's like damn near 10 stars that are actually in the water of the Aquarian jug. So these are the people that like if they can pull themselves out of it, like this is more of a Sechula that can pull itself out of it rather than a Hydor. They kind of like experience the I guess you could say the like the wool that like Aquarians are quote unquote pulling over people's eyes, right? So they position people in such a way to where they like know where they want them to go, but they also like dive into that flow themselves. So it's sort of like Aquarius is in terms of the constellation. It's kind of like it's like tester feedback loop to see if the mental framework that they're directing people under is working properly. So that's kind of like how Satula and Hydor work. They aren't necessarily, I guess you could say, the most like powerful stars, but they are important from an individual standpoint because they kind of have that like inclination of the mental framework that they're under isn't necessarily their own, and they can help direct people in a way that is beneficial. That's pretty much the bonus stars. Now, moving on to some theories, unless you guys have any questions about the Aquarius constellation. So, moving on to some theories that are quite interesting is that Aquarius has a lot of control over the majority of, I guess you could say, whatchamacallit? Yeah. All right, I shouldn't look at my phone. I got distracted by text. But basically, the theory is they have a lot of control over the aquatic constellations. So, it's like it's almost Neptune adjacent, where it's what is it like? They have control over all the aquatic constellations, which are Capricornus, Cetus, Delphinus, Eridanus, Hydra, Pisces, and then one could argue that they also have control over the Argo constellation, which is the ship, as well as the Crater constellation, which is the cup that can contain these things. So, with that being said, it's I don't know, it's a very interesting space to be in. Like personally, I don't necessarily vibe with that theory because I don't think they necessarily like pour the water that led to the river Eridanus. I think the constellation is much older. So I think it really applies to what constellations were created before it because Aquarius is one of the like oldest recognized constellations, at least in that Greco-Roman culture, because it was recognized across numerous different cultures all the way back to Babylon, right? So Babylon, I don't really know where Babylon started. Like it was correlated to the Tower of Babel and like all that biblical stuff, which would be like 5 to 10,000 years ago. I don't know. But yeah, in terms of that, I guess you could say like it's kind of on the peak of like modern adjacent style astrology. So it's an interesting thing in terms of that. It's a really cool thing to think about, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I could say they have like some mild influence over that, like other aquatic beings, but I don't think they have the total influence. I don't think it's that deep. I don't know. But yeah, other than that, that's pretty much the Aquarius constellation for you guys. It's a little bit different. It's a little more free flowing now, more so than the 11th house or what people consider to be the Aquarian sign, since it's moving into like Pisces. But it's also very lucky, and it knows it kind of it's like a cat. It always lands on its feet in terms of the Aquarius constellation. But yeah, other than that, that's Aquarius for you guys. I'll catch you on the next constellational stream, which will be Aquila, the eagle that potentially flew Aquarius up to the heavens.